Nothing's scarier than trees. Just look at them, all covered in bark. They're hiding something, I just know it. I'm joking, of course, but then again I'm reminded of those stories I've read, where the trees kept moving closer when people looked away, inching ever near them every time they look. I wonder what that's about. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should send me your scary fishing stories next at darkstories.org. As for today, I've got a very scary episode featuring terrifying things that happened in the woods. Haunted forests, monsters in the woods, terrifying tales from people who have the luck of living in the great sea of trees. Enjoy. And don't forget, you should listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or just go check out eeriecast.com for more free and creepy shows like this. Now, let's begin. Adirondacks Mystery Monster. From Anonymous. I'm an avid hiker. I've had my fair share of unnerving experiences in the wilderness, but there was one night in particular that still haunts me. It was about 5 years ago. I was on a solo backpacking trip in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. I'd hiked in about 10 miles to a remote lean-to shelter near a small pond, planning to spend a couple nights there, just taking in the surrounding woods and peaks. The first day went smoothly, and I enjoyed a peaceful evening by the campfire, listening to loons calling across the water. As I settled into my sleeping bag that night, I remember feeling a deep sense of contentment, surrounded by the stillness of the forest. Sometime in the late hours of the night, I woke abruptly to the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush near the shelter. Still half asleep, my first thought was that it must be a deer, maybe even a bear. Both were quite common in the area. But as I listened more closely, I realized the footfall pattern didn't sound like a four-legged creature. It sounded distinctly bipedal. I heard the steps grow closer, stopping just outside the open front of my lean-to. I was suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was, alone in the backcountry, miles from the nearest road, from the nearest ranger station. I held my breath, hoping that it didn't find me. For a moment, there was silence. But then there came a low growl that made my blood curdle. I don't think I've ever heard anything like it. It wasn't quite a bear, not quite human, but something disturbingly in between. I fumbled for my headlamp. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to see what it was, lurking out there in the dark. Just as I switched on the light, and I directed the beam towards the entrance of the shelter, I heard that thing take off, bounding away through the woods at unnatural speed. It was snapping branches and crunching leaves underfoot. Soon it faded away into the distance. I sat upright. I never got a glimpse of the creature itself. I didn't get much sleep the rest of the night. I was wide awake until sunrise, clinging to my knife like a teddy bear. My headlamp's battery had died long ago because I kept it on. As I got up and began to pack up all my things, I jumped at every little sound. Once I got everything packed up, I made my way back to the trailhead at a near jogging pace. I was glancing over my shoulders constantly. I had this feeling I was being followed or watched. When I got to the nearest ranger station, I reported what I'd heard to the staff. I asked if there had been any other unusual sightings in the area. To my surprise, one of the rangers there I spoke with didn't seem too shocked by my story at all. He even nodded, pulled out a sort of logbook-looking thing, and showed me some entries going back decades. These entries described encounters with a mysterious creature that apparently lurked in the particular hollow I was in. There were reports of eerie howls, foul stenches, oversized tracks, and always that same skin-crawling sense of being stalked by something unnatural. This ranger warned me to not talk about it too much in town. It tended to draw some thrill-seeking monster hunters and kooks to the area. But he confided that in his 30 years on the job, he'd seen and heard enough to convince him that there was indeed something very real, possibly very dangerous, roaming the deep woods of the Adirondacks. He personally nicknamed it the Howler, and his solemn advice to me was to steer clear of its territory, especially alone or at night. I took his advice to heart. I never have gone back to that particular area of the park again. I like to believe I'm a rational person, but I know what I heard that night, and I know I'm not alone. There's something out there in those old woods, and I think it's something a bit more than a bear. As for me, I still backpack and find great joy and peace in the outdoors. But believe me, when I'm out there in the trees, this experience is always present at the back of my mind. Possible cryptid in the woods. From Lori 911. This experience happened to me in the summer of 2019, while hiking in the Lost Creek Wilderness vicinity of Pike National Forest, Colorado. A friend and I decided to get out of the city for a day hike. It was the late afternoon by the time we reached the parking area. We expected the hike to last about 2 hours round trip. It was mostly uphill. About 20 minutes in, we noticed some trees that were bent at odd angles. I pointed them out to my friend, and I made a quick joke about Bigfoot. By the time we neared the top of the trail, my friend, who was not in the best shape, started to feel winded. We decided to take a water break before reaching the end. The birds were chirping and everything seemed normal, and the wind was calm. After 10 minutes or so, I was getting impatient, but she had not yet recovered. She told me to go on ahead, finish the hike without her. She then promised to wait in the exact spot on the trail until I was coming back down. After all, it was the uphill part that was getting to her. She assured me that she'd be fine walking back down the mountain. According to my GPS, the end of the trail was close, approximately 5 or 10 minutes away. I told her I'd take a quick walk to the overlook, snap a few pictures of the scenery, and hurry back to meet her to head back down the mountain. About 5 minutes later, hiking alone, I was near the overlook. Off to the side of the trail, I noticed some cool rock outcroppings, and I stopped to take a couple of pictures. But then I noticed how quiet the woods became. I started to feel like I was being watched. The rock outcroppings I thought were so cool a minute ago were now potential hiding spots for something. I took my pictures a bit faster, but I chickened out on finishing the short hike to the overlook. I turned and started back down the trail to where my friend was waiting for me. But that strange silence followed me. I kept looking around for the source of my unease, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. A few minutes later, I heard my friend in the distance. She was shouting my name, so I hurried to meet up with her. As I approached, I could tell something was wrong. Her face was very pale, and her voice was all shaky. When I got to her, she explained that the woods went quiet just a few minutes after I left, and she began to see movement in the trees a little ways off the trail. There was also a strange clicking noise coming from where the trees started to sway, a loud noise similar to someone clicking their tongue. She said the movement was at a height taller than a regular person, and obviously made by something heavy, but she could not get a good look. Whatever it was, there was no sign of anything strange now, but the woods were still eerily quiet, and the feeling of being watched was still present. We booked it down the trail to my car, ignoring the need to take any more breaks. When the parking lot was about 5 minutes away, the birds began singing again, and those normal forest noises returned. When my friend described the clicking sound, it reminded me of a story I'd heard about the clicking cryptid, Not sure if you've heard of it, but it's this creature that can allegedly cloak itself and clicks like the monster from the movie Predator. Have you ever had or heard of a similar experience to this, specifically out in the Colorado woods? I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we might have encountered that day. Seeing is believing. From K-Bar the Donkey. This story takes place 10 years back, when I was a senior in high school. I grew up in a rural part of South Carolina. My friends and I would go camping just about every other weekend when the weather was good, and sometimes even when it wasn't. We loved the outdoors, never really needed an excuse to get out into the woods, spend some time in nature. This story happened during one of our camping trips. Now, I would never call myself a sensitive or anything like that. I never saw paranormal things that I could recall growing up. It wasn't even until I was an adult, and way after the events of this story, that my grandma would tell me I used to see ghosts when I was little. Whatever that means. But again, I don't personally remember these things myself. However, I would and still do have odd feelings about certain places. For example, I could walk into a house and immediately know that I did not like the energy or the feeling it gave off. Alternatively, I could walk into a place and feel warmth and at peace. But never anything visual, and I never chalked it up to ghosts or anything like that. Anyway, on our camping trip, we were going to spend a night on one of my friend's family's hunting properties, which was situated inside a national forest, which will remain nameless for the sake of anonymity. I had never been there, nor had any of my other friends going on this trip. There were 5 of us in total, and we each drove our separate vehicles to the location. We got there, drove down some long dirt roads that were basically just glorified trails to a small clearing where we planned to set up camp. We spent some time setting up tarps with our chairs underneath, and I strung up my hammock, where I planned on spending the night, between the roll bar of my Jeep and a tree. After our campsite was all set up, we spent some time hiking the trails, exploring the woods, really just enjoying some time with nature. We were all having a good time. Even my friend Craig, who despite being one of the most nature-loving people I've ever met in my life, always had to be dragged kicking and screaming on camping trips. Craig is one of 2 people from high school that I still talk to this day. One of my best friends, and more importantly to this story, was adamant that the paranormal did not exist. We all made our way back to the camp as the sun started getting low in the sky, and I began getting materials together for a fire, prepping for the night. My friend Michael, whose family owned the land, rallied us all together to the idea of playing some manhunt once it got completely dark. All of us were on board with the idea. Who doesn't love tracking their friends down in the woods in the middle of the night? So once it was dark, Craig, our other friend Randy, and I set out into the woods to hide, while Michael and our friend Chris hung back and waited to come look for us. We ran down one trail, then turned down another, finding a nice slope to hide on. We waited there. After 45 minutes or so, we of course started to get bored and gave a couple of shouts to point the other 2 in the general area we were in. They started getting closer and closer, and eventually a beam from their flashlight finally found us. The 3 of us took off in different directions. I backtracked down one of the trails we had originally come down, illuminated only by moonlight, until I came to the crossroads where that trail crossed the trail that goes to the camp. I found an especially thick bit of brush and tall grass and decided that would do just fine to conceal me. It would also let me monitor the trail to see if anyone goes by. I was lying there in the grass and brush for maybe 5 minutes when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't figure out what was causing it. That's when I noticed the woods got completely silent. All the bugs, frogs, and birds just went quiet. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and breathing, and something inside, something primal, telling me, "You need to leave. Go find your friends." So I said screw the game, and I just took off, running back down the trail towards where my friends were. I felt such relief being back with them. I found all 4 of them back down the trail together. I was the last one to be found, but I didn't care. Almost instantly, that feeling went away and I felt better. I brushed it off as me just psyching myself out. I didn't mention anything about it to any of them. So back towards the camp we went. We took kind of a roundabout way to get there, just enjoying the good weather and listening to the sounds of nature, which had at some point returned to their normally scheduled program. We made our way back to that crossroads where I'd been lying in the grass before. Michael, Chris, and Randy were all walking side by side in front. Just behind them, Craig and I were walking side by side as we crossed the intersection of trails. I was on Craig's right, looking towards him as we talked. As we crossed the intersection, Craig casually shined his flashlight down the crossing trail to the left. There, caught right in the beam of light, was the perfect silhouette of a person halfway stepped onto the trail from the woods. The person's silhouette had no definition besides an outline, and it was completely gray. It had one leg and most of its torso and all of its head in the trail, with only its other leg and foot behind, still in the woods. Craig and I took maybe another step and a half, as if just on autopilot, until I said, "What was that?" Craig joined in. "You saw that too?" As we both took a step back, and he shined his flashlight back down the trail. But now there was nothing. We quickly told the other guys, who claimed we were just seeing things, or thought we were joking. Craig got an even better look than I had, and he confirmed what I saw, which was the perfect shape of a person, completely gray in color, and absolutely could not be mistaken for anything else. Finally back at camp, and despite the other 3 disregarding what we saw, everyone slept in their cars that night. Everyone except me, whose Jeep was tiny and completely open. So there I was, lying in my hammock, in the middle of the woods, after just seeing a possible ghost. I was all alone and exposed. I stared up at the stars, just hoping that when I close my eyes and open them again, I don't see someone standing right over me. I didn't, thankfully, and the next day we packed everything up and headed out. We never did camp there again, but not necessarily because of what Craig and I saw. Talking with Craig about it later, we both found it interesting that upon seeing the silhouette, neither of us felt scared or intimidated, which I especially found interesting considering the very scary feeling and experience I'd felt in the exact spot just half an hour earlier. I've not seen anything since, but occasionally I'll walk into places that give me bad vibes. I've heard a couple of things here and there, but this event remains the only time I've ever seen anything paranormal. Craig took back everything he ever said about the paranormal and ghosts, and now he's a staunch believer. I guess sometimes seeing is believing. Lynda. From Pumpkin Mama 2022. I'm a young mother, about to turn 19, and I have 2 toddler daughters, who, for the sake of this story, I'll just call Everly and Jillian. We live in a double wide out in the country. Our home is surrounded by woods, and we have a lot of animals, including 2 dogs, a bearded dragon, 2 Madagascar hissing cockroaches, a cockatiel, and 5 snakes. The snake part is usually what gets me weird looks. But my girls are animal lovers, just as I've been since I was their age. We live relatively chill lives, but occasionally we get visited by some unexplained things, and that's where our story begins. It was a warm night back in September of last year. My daughters were sleeping soundly in their beds, and I was awake washing dishes from dinner. It was around 10 o'clock at night. On the kitchen island behind me sat my cell phone, plugged up and charging as I continued to force it to play music for me. Suddenly, interrupting my one-person concert, my phone crashed to the ground, cord still attached. I whipped around, wondering how on earth it had managed to fall, considering it had been lying flat on the countertop, untouched. As I bent over to pick it up, I felt a gust of cold air hit me in the face. And at the same time, I made a mental note of the odd angle at which my phone cord hung. It was in a loop, which somehow did not undo itself during the fall. It really didn't make any sense. The tension on the cord, due to my phone falling, should have pulled the loop out, but it didn't. I picked my phone up and stuck my hand through the loop to unwrap it. The air within the loop was ice cold. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I set my phone back on the island and nervously went back about my business. That was the first time I think I encountered her. This same exact scenario had played out more than once. Always my phone falling off a perfectly flat surface, and the cord staying in that same unnatural loop. After a few of these experiences, I came to name the entity Lynda, after a certain horror movie character who was killed by strangulation by phone cord. It seemed like a fitting name. I never saw Lynda outright, but every so often I'd see a woman's figure in a red dress with long hair at the corner of my eye. Of course, she would vanish when I turned to look. Everly and Jillian saw her a few times though, and always in the same place. They would point to my nightstand, where my phone sat charging, and say, "Mommy, who's that girl?" This ghost, as we assumed she was, has never done anything malicious. Nothing downright scary. She just stands there, next to my tangled phone cord. She seems fascinated by it, I guess. When she does appear, the room fills with a cool breeze, as if a window had been left open. And every so often, a sweet floral smell would accompany her presence. Other than that, though, she's just kind of there. My daughters enjoy saying hello to her in the mornings, and we make inside jokes about our roommate, Lynda. Our animals don't pay her any mind, which makes me believe that she means us no harm. After all, animals tend to have a better sense of the paranormal than humans do. Everly likes to pretend that Lynda is her big sister, and Jillian, being only 2, just giggles and smiles whenever she sees her. This story may not be particularly scary, but it's fascinating in my opinion, and we do enjoy sharing it. My daughters are always begging me to tell people about Lynda. I like to think she protects us, even guards our home. Although she creeped me out at first, I've come to appreciate her. She's a sort of friend for my girls, and mentions of her always make us smile. She doesn't seem to be a predatory presence in the least. If anything, she seems happy to coexist with us. And frankly, we're happy to share our home with you too, Lynda. Letchworth State Park. From TJB. For starters, I live in Western New York. I was in the Boy Scouts of America. When I was in 7th grade, my fellow scouts and I went to Letchworth State Park for a little getaway, to go hiking and camping with friends and family. When we got there, I set up my tent on a small slope, pushed back along the tree line, far away from other people. My brother, though, pitched his tent right next to mine, and his friends set up their tents in front of him. But I was still the farthest back. The day was great. We went hiking and had ice cream in the morning, then played games in the evening. The games we played would drive us deep into the woods, where no one could see you until they were right next to you. During a game of manhunt, the topic of wendigos and skinwalkers came into conversation. One of the kids yelled, "Wendigo!" many times into the night before asking me, "Do they actually exist?" I shook my head in disappointment before retiring for the night. but that night would prove to be a spooky one. I'm a bit of an insomniac. I can't sleep well in the woods either. Now, my tent had 2 doors, one facing the woods and the other facing a dying fire that would soon leave an empty field. I woke up at 3 a.m., needing to use the restroom. After procrastinating for a bit, I finally got out of bed. When I returned and lay on my side facing the woods, I saw this really bright light. I already couldn't sleep, especially with the sounds of rabbits out there. All I could do was watch this mysterious, unexplained light in the field. But I dozed off at some point. I woke up many hours later and exited the tent. I looked out to where the light had been and only saw an empty field. The worst part was that when I sent my brother, who was about 5 foot at the time, to exactly where the light was, whatever it was would have been 8 to 10 feet tall. For the rest of that night, I slept with my brother and his friends, hoping the light didn't come back. Luckily, nothing else happened. I don't believe it. Why should you? From CoffeeQueen. I just want to say that I have trouble believing this myself, so I doubt you'll believe it in the slightest. This was and still is the scariest thing to ever happen to me. Middle of the night, my phone rang, waking me from the best sleep I'd had in a while. I groaned and stretched and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Squinting my eyes from the bright light of the screen, I read the name, Drug Lord. It was what I called my buddy whom I'd been friends with since middle school. I rubbed my eyes and reluctantly answered. What, man? He was out of breath, not making any sense at all.
Come find me. It's following. I can see it. I need... Dude, please just get here.
I felt like he must have been using again, and I let out a sigh. Man, calm down. What are you on? Where are you? I asked. I was trying to make sense of the situation in my head. He must have been strung out on something, needing a ride. But following? Maybe he had stolen from a dealer again.
No, I'm not tripping again. Dude, I'm about a mile from that...
He cut off for a moment. A scream came through my phone. That scream wasn't from my buddy. It sounded like a young woman.
Let her go!
I heard him shout. I dropped my phone. I grabbed for it as fast as I could and threw on my shoes. I was still wearing my work uniform. I'd been working so many hours I fell asleep in it. I grabbed my keys and rushed out of the front door. My friend was silent. Dude, I yelled, answer me. I need to know where to come get you.
It got her.
I could hear his voice catching.
I think it killed her.
And then he just kept saying that. Where are you? I said again, freaking out. Did someone just get killed? Is that what he said? What was happening? For a moment he seemed to come through.
You know that old trap house off Moore? About a mile south from there. I cut through the forest to get home and Liz was with me.
He explained, but it was hard to make out. Great, the woods. It was going to be fun trying to find him. I'm going to park near that old shed, okay? Can you make it there? I'll try to walk towards you too. Liz was also a friend of mine. The idea of her getting mixed up into all of this surprised me, and honestly upset me. If Drug Lord had really gotten her killed. He took a moment to answer.
Yeah, I'll try, man. I don't know what that thing is. It got her. It got her.
Bears run through there often. Are you sure it wasn't? He cut me off, screaming.
It wasn't a bear. I'd know if it was a freaking bear.
His loudness after being so soft-spoken caught me off guard. I nearly dropped my phone again. All right, sorry. It's gonna take me about 15 minutes to get there. Are you safe?
No, I'm running as fast as I can. Liz, she slowed it down. It came out of nowhere.
The phone cut off shortly after that. I wasn't sure if he had hung up on me or lost service, or worse. I finally made it to the shed near the woods. I really had pressed pedal to metal to get there too. Luckily, there had not been a cop in sight. Or maybe unluckily. I jumped from the car, calling my friend for the 100th time since it had cut off. I made sure to grab my gun from the glove compartment as well. I don't think it would kill a bear, but at least it was better than nothing. Still no answer though. God, it was dark. I really hated the woods. I never believed in tempting fate, and going into the woods at night wasn't a good idea. I went to yell for Drug Lord, but had a feeling in my stomach that made me hesitate. I took a deep breath, fighting my instincts, and I started to head towards where my friend said he would be. He'd given me a decent idea, but the woods were massive. He could have gotten turned around at any point, especially in this darkness. My only saving grace in finding him was his hat. He always wore a trucker's hat, with this glow-in-the-dark rim and glowing shamrock. He always talked about how dope it was. I scanned the trees, looking for it, and of course came up with nothing. So how was I gonna find him? He should have been around here. I headed north since he should have been coming from that direction. I didn't want to get lost though. I picked up a rock and started to mark trees as I went by. If there was something dangerous out here, I had to be stealthy, make the least amount of noise as possible. I called his phone again and I heard his ringtone, the intro to Rick and Morty. I followed the sound and finally found him. Well, no, I found his phone. Where was he? Had he ditched his phone to distract whatever was following him? Then I realized how much sound I'd been making in this area, and a shiver ran down my spine. My stomach went cold. I felt sweat running down my forehead, trailing my neck. It was silent in this area. I couldn't hear a thing. Then again, I hadn't heard a thing since entering these woods. That's always a terrible sign, right? Where was Drug Lord? Where was this thing that was chasing him? I turned around, hoping he had made it past me. Maybe he was at my car already. Then I heard a twig snap, and my whole body jerked upward. It wasn't far, but it could be anything. A squirrel could have made that sound. But something told me to run. I knew that was the last thing I should do, never run from a predator. So I slowly started to walk the way I came, feeling for the trees I'd marked as I went by. I remembered the rock I'd squeezed tightly in my hand. I threw it as hard as I could in the direction I'd come from. I still had my friend's phone as well. The screen was dark, but I could still see it had 20% battery. I could use this. I turned the volume up, and I threw it as hard as I could into a group of pine trees, aiming high. Hopefully, it had landed into some branches towards the top of the trees. I didn't hear it hit the ground, so that was a good indication. Although my heart was beating so hard, I could have missed it. I picked up the pace, now going at a brisk jog. I repeatedly called his phone, hoping to distract whatever that thing might be. Soon I saw the opening of the woods. I broke into a run, rushing towards my car. I finally made it, and I threw myself inside, but no Drug Lord. I called his phone again and again, just in case he was still trying to get out. That's when I saw a green glow in the shed. I blinked a few times, and I saw it again. Was he in there? I looked around and started my car. I began to back up, getting as close to the old broken shed as I could. Then he came busting out of the shed, jumping into the passenger seat. He looked horrible, like he'd been on a bender for a week. Dude, what is going on? I went in there looking for you. I didn't see anything. I told him. There was more irritation in my voice than I meant. His eyes were wide. If you didn't see it, you won't believe me. There were tears in his eyes. I've never seen anything like it. It took her. It took her, man. I didn't know what to say to that. He was so upset. But could this all have been a delusion? I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not messed up. I've been clean. I only went to the trap because Liz was there. I just wanted to get her out. I didn't know what to think. I then noticed my phone was still on a call. On a call? Last call I made was to his phone. How could that be possible?
Hurry, I need you to come find me. It's following me.
Drug Lord's voice said on the phone. But Drug Lord and I looked at each other. My heart pounded. An icy cold feeling welled up in my stomach. That was Drug Lord's voice on the other end of the phone, I was sure of it. Though it couldn't be, because he was right here. That's when a thump hit the windshield. We hadn't moved up until then. I was frozen. We both looked up at the same time, and we saw it. I only saw a few parts of it. What I did saw were the hands of this thing. Huge, humanoid, but clawed. The skin on it was so pale, it was hard to even see. Not blinding nor unsettling, it made you want to look away, is what I mean. There was dark crimson fluid splattered all over it. Its eyes were dark, hollow holes, but an amber light shone through back there somewhere. They made you want to keep staring into them, but the longer you did, the more hollow you felt. All my emotions began to drain as I stared. Drug Lord smacked me in the chest, snapping me out of it. "Don't look! Drive!" he commanded. I threw it into drive and turned a hard left towards my house. I felt something hit the back bumper. I think it chased us a bit, but I refused to look back. Drug Lord kept his head forward as well. Eventually, we made it to my house okay. We ran inside, locking the door behind us. Nothing came of this. We reported our friend missing in the woods. The police had brought us both in for questioning and at one time tried to hold us for murder. But her body was never found, and no official charges were filed. We know what happened, though. But who would believe us? I hardly believe it myself. Liz is dead. Drug Lord and I don't speak much anymore. And that's all there is to it. Encounter on the Hill. From The Dark Knight. In July of 2018, I was living on my parents' farm in rural Kentucky. Being an upperclassman in high school, I was glad to have the summer respite that provided much-needed distractions from my grueling studies. Our farm was small, roughly 20 acres or so of crop-laden land. We grew corn, green beans, several types of sweet peppers, and even watermelons every once in a while. My mom loved to sit by some raised beds, growing tulips, petunias, and an orchid or two. I would help out by moving large bags of seeds from point A to point B in the front loader of my tractor. My dad taught me early on how to ride, mow, and carry items in my tractor. So by the time of this encounter, I was able to maneuver the thing with ease, which really only comes with experience. Another important piece of information relating to the encounter is that we have a large hill that rests perpendicular to our country house. The hill is beautiful and wild, flourishing with plenty of species of insects, mammals, and other critters. On the day in question, I had to do my least favorite chore before doing things on the tractor: cleaning up the chicken coop. It was an unpleasant experience, and I hated the smell of moldy pine shavings, but I got it done. Now it was time for fun, or rather those tasks that I could perform on the tractor. I went to the shed where we stored equipment. There sat our magnificent red Kubota. It was small for a tractor, but it was the perfect size for what we needed on the farm. I checked the fuel level, topped off the tank, and hopped into the seat. It started right up, roaring right to life, and I got to work. The first thing to do was to move 5 bags of chicken feed from my dad's truck to a storage area for chicken supplies. I quickly finished that up and looked at my list for the next assignment. Mow the hill that I mentioned above. It would have to be mowed so some folks could come to our property to convert the piles of cut grass into usable hay bales. So I lowered the brush cutter extension to an adequate level and got to work. About 20 minutes in, I'd mowed several strips back and forth along the hill. I was working up a good sweat. I continued on, cutting a new strip from the long tree line. Suddenly, this blur of dark gray fur burst from the trees, seeming to glide across the field into the trees on the opposite side of the hill. I don't think I would have seen it if it hadn't made such a commotion when initially exiting the forest. I figured it was a coyote or something of the sort. I stopped my tractor, grabbed my phone, and texted my dad. He was on the other side of the farm, cutting up some dead trees that had fallen from a recent storm.
Spotted a coyote or something on the hill,
I typed. We took coyotes seriously, as our chickens commonly roamed free in a large area. They could be easily harmed or killed by a predator. With that in mind, I resumed my mowing job and eventually forgot about the whole thing entirely. As I began mowing through a particularly thick patch of grass, the furry creature from before ran out of the woods to my right. This time it purposefully avoided the brush cutter blades as it jumped onto the back of my tractor and stood still for a moment. That's when I was able to get a good look at it. It vaguely resembled a coyote or a wolf, but its limbs and paws were very odd. The paws, in fact, were not paws at all. To me, they looked like fur-covered hands, a man's hands. Its arms and legs were too defined and muscular to be those of an ordinary canine. Even in the daylight, its eyes had this eerie, unsettling glow to them. There was intelligence behind them, like the thing was calculating every possible move. Its face resembled a canine, but the way its skin drooped and was detached in some places made its face look all mangled and off-kilter. The creature looked utterly wrong, from its head to its misshapen toes. It then began trying to climb up to where I was, and after its first failed attempt, my brain finally began to work again. I went into fight or flight mode, and I chose to fight. I swerved the tractor from side to side, eventually flinging the thing off. Then I sped up and hit it in the side with my front loader. I really thought that would kill it, but it really just looked annoyed. It then proceeded to hightail it back to the woods. After that experience, I finished a couple more strips before calling it a day. I was too overwhelmed to safely operate the tractor, so I did the smart thing and took it back to the shed. I arrived, though, at a grisly sight. All of our chickens had been eviscerated. Gore lay about in the chicken's enclosure, but none of it seemed to have been eaten. It was like something was trying to send a message. I couldn't help but think of that thing before, so maybe it was trying to tell me that this would happen to me if we crossed paths again. I never would see that creature again, but I know that wasn't the last time it visited. One night, my dad and I were sitting on the front porch of our house. We were facing towards that hill. We were talking about harvests and insects that ate crops, when all of a sudden, a blood-curdling screech came from the direction of the hill. My dad and I both shot up out of our chairs. "You heard that, right?" my dad asked in a panicked tone. "Yeah, I heard it," I responded, confirming his fears. My dad's a tough guy, and I'd like to think that I'm well-weathered myself. We've both been to heck and back, but that noise we heard, it still makes me shiver. Now, I'm not sure whether that screech came from the creature I encountered on the hill, but something tells me it was the culprit. Stay safe in the woods, y'all. A presence from a stranger. It was the summer of 2020. I was recently accepted to be an intern at a research facility in the middle of nowhere in the United States. I'm from the Caribbean, so yes, I would be far away from home for 2 whole months, working night shifts on a project that would require me to do late-night runs to the lab. Emotionally, it was a mixture of sadness and excitement. I was getting paid really good money, so I definitely was up for the adventure. The research facility was part of a farmland. The architecture was the same from the 1800s. I did some personal research before getting into the whole thing. I found out the property was once managed by a wealthy family that had many acres of various crops. Sadly, all those crops were operated by slaves that also lived on the property in a building called the slave quarters. After my research, I was curious to see the place, to know how it actually looked in person, and how the facility operated. Then the day came. I was stunned by how beautiful it was. The place was serene. Ponds everywhere, forests all around, flowering plants in every corner with butterflies, of course. A look in any direction looked like a picture from a postcard. It was breathtaking. The staff showed us where the students would sleep. Lo and behold, it was the old slave quarters. I really didn't know how to feel about that. As a fan of the paranormal, it felt like we were an investigating team staying in the most dreadful place of the whole property. The building had a hallway of rooms on the second floor, and mine was the first one up the stairs. The dreadfulness and sadness there, paired with the loud creaking noises of our own steps on the wooden floor, and the unbearable sound the screen door and wooden door made, created a somewhat tense and chaotic atmosphere. I do recall that throughout my time there, I spent as little time in my room as possible. I really tried only using it for sleeping. At least I was paired with such a sweet and awesome roommate. We'll call her Lily. Lily and I were very similar in terms of how we lived, so it was easy for us to get along. The weeks passed, and I befriended a staff member who was also doing research. He lived on the property, but in a house a little farther away from us. We were hanging out at the property's private library one night, when all of a sudden, it came to me. I asked him, "Hey, do you know of anything weird about this property? I'm kind of a fan of spooky stuff, and where we sleep just feels weird at times. Plus the history. I don't know." I'll never forget the look in his eyes, as if he was surprised and a bit creeped out that I picked up on something. He then asked, "Why do you ask? Have you seen or heard anything?" I was already surprised by his reaction, so I shook my head. He then replied, "Well, there are various stories about this place that I sadly found out because I was too curious, as you are right now. And I say sadly because now I'm scared to be alone here. Every corner of this place gives me the creeps." After that, he started to tell me one by one all he knew about the place. First, there were many archived encounters where witnesses left a written statement of what they saw. Different people on many different occasions saw a woman dressed in a black Victorian dress. The lady had a transparent, dark veil covering her face, as if she was a widow. The witnesses said they saw her literally levitate throughout the main hallway of the property, or near the main pond. Some accounts had seen a child with her. Her face had no features, but you could see her hands, and they were pale white and translucent. The second story was about an intern. One night, while all the interns were out, she stayed behind alone on the property. She decided to explore the halls and found herself in an attic. A while after that, everyone came back from the outing, and they found the intern almost paralyzed in her own bed. She couldn't speak, and she was getting very sick very fast. She finally said, "I was in the attic, and I saw it. It just stared at me, then everything in the room began to move." After all that, I was so scared, and to be honest, my first reaction was to laugh. Maybe it was rude, but I was so freaked out that I needed to release some tension. He then looked at me and told me, "You can laugh all you want, but there's proof." While he said that, he lifted his hand and pointed to something. It was a black box on a top shelf. You definitely needed a ladder to get to it. The smirk I had from laughing disappeared off my face. My fear was official. He changed subjects after that, and he later asked me not to tell anyone about it, because he was told not to spread information that might scare people away from the property. I promised I was going to keep quiet, knowing I was indeed breaking that promise the day after, because I told Lily the very next day, and I needed to see what was in that box, so I told some other people about it. To my luck, they were up to the challenge. One night we grabbed a ladder and managed to get the box. We opened it and immediately regretted the decision. All the written accounts he told me about were very real and right there. They existed, well preserved in plastic coverings. The account of the intern, all I'm going to say is that it was true, and there were even pictures to prove it. And there were more details about the lady in the Victorian dress. But I stopped right there. I needed to stop. You've heard the phrase, "Curiosity killed the cat." Well, my curiosity indeed killed any sense of peace and safety I felt being there. All of this happened in the first 3 weeks, so I had a whole other month there, and I was not excited anymore, especially since my job was a night shift type of job. We closed the box and left it in its place. Obviously, we discussed our findings, and we left it at that. Because what happens at the library stays at the library, as one of us had said. The days after that were weird. We tried to forget what happened, and to be honest, we did somewhat of a good job at it. We hung out a lot, drank a lot, had as much fun as we could. In a matter of days, I felt okay again. Like 2 weeks after, the internship was about to be over, and the director of the place decided to throw a party for everyone at his place. We were all excited, but obviously sad too, since I wouldn't be seeing any of the friends I made ever again. When I saw the date of the party, it was my last night of work, so unfortunately, I wasn't able to go. The night of the party finally arrived. Everyone was getting ready. I walked around to see if at least one of my friends was staying behind too, but no. Turns out everyone was going but me. The reality that I was the only one in the property didn't hit me. I'm a forgetful person like that. I actually found myself very okay with the idea. Hours passed. Soon it was around midnight. I was still awake because of work, so I decided to get into an article I needed to read. I was in my room with the screen door closed and the wooden door open. It was a peaceful night, very quiet and serene. The light breeze coming through the screen door made the room feel comfortable, so I decided to stay there and read my article. I got up on the top bunk with my back facing the door and started to read. I would say maybe half an hour passed, when all of a sudden, I started to hear heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. I knew some of the students wore heavy boots all the time, so I assumed it was one of them. Not paying too much attention to the footsteps, I kept reading, since I was about to finish, and I was getting into an important conclusion of the study. Whoever was coming up those stairs reached the top, and they stopped for a second. I was still very into my article. Suddenly, the screen door of my room opened wide. It had somewhat of a little lock, so you also had to unlock that to get in. With my back still facing the door, I assumed it was just Lily, coming back from the party. 4 very heavy footsteps reached my bunk bed. That's when I finally turned around, saying, "So, Lily, how was the party?" There was no response. I could feel a presence there. Being on the top bunk, I could almost feel how my face was close to whoever was in front of me. But there was no one there. I was frozen then, almost paralyzed, and my heart was pounding too. I gasped for air while staring at the door slowly closing now. Once I felt that the presence was gone, I jumped off the top bunk and I closed both doors. I turned on every light possible. I was trembling horribly at that point. I couldn't believe what just happened, and I really thought I'd fallen asleep and it was all just a vivid dream. Sadly, it was not. I was fully awake, fully aware, even more so now. I tried to go back to my reading, but I couldn't concentrate anymore. A while after that, everyone returned from the party. I could hear laughter and I could smell their alcohol from a mile away. I didn't want to ruin their night, so I decided to fake that I was sleeping. My alarm went off at 3 a.m. to go to work, and I turned it off. I decided I was going to make up an excuse the next day to tell my boss. I couldn't move from my bed. Some parts of me were still trembling. All these stories, all the encounters, the evidence from the box in the library. What happened to the intern that stayed behind? All of it flooded into my thoughts. Days after that, I ran into my friend, that staff member who told me about everything and the box. I needed to tell him what happened, but as soon as I told him I heard and saw something, he said, "No, I don't want to know. This place is already scary enough to me." The program came to an end. I was back home before long when I told my family what happened. Thankfully, they're very open-minded. They've had supernatural experiences themselves before, so they understood completely and even tried to comfort me. To this day, I wonder who entered my room and why. Maybe they got close to my bed to tell me something that my ears just couldn't hear. But I wonder what it was. Maybe they were asking for help. But I'll never know, and that will haunt me to my last days. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.